What's up, guys? 1-2 last night. Not great. Not the best. Ole Miss was the one that got there. They were losing early, but they caught up, and it was like a close game at halftime. And then they got into a pretty big lead later in the game. They had like a double-digit lead with not that much time left. And then they decided to make things tense and blow almost that entire lead. But they were able to hang on right at the end and still win it, still put it away. So that worked out well. The other two did not. The Iowa game was statistically pretty close, and they only had 3 turnovers in the entire game. So I don't understand how with so few turnovers you wind up not winning that game. I mean, they were maximizing their possessions in that way by basically not turning it over at all. So they didn't play that poorly. I don't know how they lost that game. They fell way behind earlier in the game, but they came all the way back, and then they were winning the game with under 2 minutes to play, and then they didn't score again, and they lost. So that's awesome. That's great. And then the Air Force one that just didn't get there. At halftime, it looked pretty decent. I think they were up 2 or 3 at the half, and it's like, all right, they can probably get things going a little bit more and do this. They had just an abysmal second half. Shocking with how bad Wyoming has been on the road and how they're in a letdown spot. I don't know what happened there. Moving on to today, we got all 3 of the sports that you would expect to be in action or in action, except the hockey. I think we're headed into the All-Star break or whatever. And for the last few days, like I said, there have only been a few teams playing, which is weird. There are 3 hockey games. I'm not getting involved in any of them. Strongest lean, if I had to lean to any of them, would be to Ottawa. Detroit is down from -128 to 123 on the money line at home. Looks like they have 94% of the tickets, 99% of the cash. I don't think those numbers are accurate at this point, but they're probably going to be a public team, especially when they're only kind of a small favorite. It looks kind of easy to lay them as a favorite here. Detroit's been off for a while. They've had 3 days off at this point, and this is the last game for both of these teams going into the All-Star break. But Detroit beat Vegas, the returning champs, in their previous game. Their previous several games have all been against good teams, right? They had a road trip. Going back all the way to, probably Ottawa at home, Edmonton at home, way back on the 11th, an overtime loss, and they beat LA Kings. The LA Kings went on the road, beat Toronto, beat Florida in overtime, lost game against Carolina, who's a tough team, came back home, beat Tampa, who's decent, lost by 1 to Dallas, and they shut out Philadelphia, and then beat Vegas. So a crazy run of a bunch of good games. And now they face Ottawa before going into the All-Star break. I think they might not totally pay attention to Ottawa. They've had multiple days off, which might hurt their winning momentum. Ottawa might have maybe gained some momentum after they got blown out by the New York Rangers, which was after losing to the Bruins in overtime. So kind of a tough spot coming off that game. The Rangers handled them. They then won 2 days ago in overtime against Nashville, which might help them gain some momentum to go out on the road to play this one game. So I think Ottawa's in the more focused spot here. Detroit has had more days off, but I think that might hurt their momentum, whereas Ottawa might gain some momentum from getting that last win 2 days ago against Nashville. I'm not going to play it, but that's the best lean that I would say in hockey is to the Ottawa Senators. Over in the NBA, I have one play. It's going to be on against the Orlando Magic on the San Antonio Spurs +5. It looks like the market's way against me, except for the fact that the number keeps moving down. It's moved down from 5 to 4.5 on the Magic as a road favorite, but it does look like the Magic have 80% of the cash, but 67% of the tickets on the other side on the Spurs. I don't think I buy that. Do you really buy that the public is going to be playing the San Antonio Spurs? Probably not against even though the Magic have been struggling. The Spurs have a horrific record. And who's going to want the Spurs after what they just did? They just lost. Who did they lose to? They lost to the Washington Wizards, which was a game I was on the Wizards, because that was a letdown spot for San Antonio coming off beating the Minnesota Timberwolves. Big win over the Timberwolves, and then the Spurs suffered the letdown, and they blew a big lead. That's pretty embarrassing, losing at home after having a big lead to the Washington Wizards. I think they're in a good spot to bounce back and turn it around. That was a letdown spot coming off the big win over Minnesota. So I think the Spurs are in a much better spot here to have a more positive showing after that bad loss. So I like that. And then you got on the other side of things, and the Spurs are in a third game in 4 days and a fourth game in 6 days, but they're all at home, whereas Orlando on the other side is also in a third game in 4 days and a fourth game in 6, but they're doing it all in different cities, which is much more difficult. They went and they lost at Memphis by 1. Then they came home, played Phoenix, and they crushed Phoenix. Really big win for Orlando. They're beating Phoenix. And then they went out on the road the next night on a back-to-back and played tough at Dallas and only lost the game by 2 points at Dallas, which is crazy. And Luka was playing in that game for Dallas too. So good performance by Orlando. They're only coming short by 2, but when you have a game like that where it's a tough game against a good team and you come that close and you fall short, you tend to not be in the best spot going into the next game. And I think that's what Orlando's in. This is a sandwich spot. I mean, they beat Phoenix and then the next night played really tough at Dallas, and they have Minnesota up next on Friday. I think they might overlook the San Antonio Spurs here, sandwiched in between these bigger teams, even though Orlando's been struggling a bit. I think it's going to be tough to get right back up off the mat after the Dallas game, after 2 big games in a row, and with Minnesota up next, even though they do want to get a win, and obviously this is a winnable game. San Antonio's in a bounce-back spot and in a much better spot to focus on this game because they want to win as well, whereas Orlando, they're in a much tougher spot. They're in the tougher travel spot by far, and laying points on the road, man, that's tough to do. So I don't know if the market percentages are going to start shifting on this. It looks like the number is moving down and in my direction, but that's the play in the NBA. San Antonio Spurs +5. And then we go over to college basketball, where there are a few leans that I have that I just can't quite do. We have a packed college basketball card here. I lean against Baylor, but I can't quite do it. This one, the line is kind of right in line with what I would think it would be. I think Ken Palm, let me see. Here's Baylor winning by 3. You got Baylor up. Baylor was up from 3 to 3.5, but it's back down to 3. They're at Central Florida, and it's tough for these Big 12 teams to go to Central Florida, who's a new team to the conference, because it's a spot that's not that familiar to them. And UCF is coming off kind of an ugly game against another one of the Big 12 newcomers, Cincinnati, where they lost. So I think UCF could be in a decent bounce-back spot here with Baylor coming into their house and it being an unfamiliar venue for Baylor. And Baylor is coming off a triple overtime loss to TCU, who is now ranked. So, and they have Iowa State, Texas Tech, Kansas all next, and Oklahoma. So they have 4 ranked teams in a row after this. So it is a tough spot for Baylor, man. And Baylor has not looked good on the road. They've only played 3 road games this year. They've all been in conference, and they won 1, which was an overtime win at Oklahoma State. So that was close to being a loss to Oklahoma State, and they lost at Kansas State and at Texas. So their road performances have not been good. So I do lean to UCF here. This one is close to a play for me, but I haven't been able to quite get there on this one just because Baylor's on the 3-game loss streak, and I think at some point it's like, well, they got to bounce back, although that might be what the public thinks. So, like, Baylor's a ranked team. They're a good team. 3 losses in a row. They're going to bounce back against a bad team, right? So, yeah, I tend to think otherwise. It's just a little bit tricky for me to get there on this one, but I like UCF for all the reasons I just said. Baylor, before the TCU game, had lost to Texas, which it's a tough venue to play in, but Texas is down this year, and so is Kansas State. So Baylor really shouldn't have lost either of those games necessarily, like as far as they're concerned. Like, well, we're ranked and we just lost to 2 unranked teams. What is up with that? And then losing to TCU may be a bit more excusable just because, but it was at home for Baylor, but just because TCU is now ranked and TCU is the best out of those 3 teams there. And probably it could be the only of those 3 that are going to make the tournament. But is Baylor going to be in a bounce-back mode? I don't know, because like I said, they have big games up on the horizon, too, and that was a triple OT game against TCU. But TCU played well coming off that game last night. I think they won against Texas Tech, so that was a big game for them. But Texas Tech, a big team coming into their house, a ranked team. So TCU was able to keep their foot on the gas and step up for that one. So I don't know, but I lean to UCF. A couple of the other leans that I'd have, I really do lean against Richmond. But the number, I think, is just not where you'd want it to be here. Richmond just beat Dayton, man. So big win for Richmond. Coming off a huge win against Dayton. They're in a huge letdown spot, that's for sure. Fordham is their opponent hosting Richmond. Fordham just lost one of 2 road games. They just lost to Duquesne to finish that 2-game road stretch there. But the problem with this is that Richmond is only like a 2-point favorite. They're actually down to 1.5. And Ken Palm has them significantly better than Fordham, ranked at 82, where Fordham is ranked 189. So he has Richmond by 5. So I can't quite do it, even though Richmond is also in a sandwich because they have VCU up next, who's another one of the better teams in the A10. So this game's sandwiched in between like the two top teams in the A10. And Richmond did beat Duquesne not that long ago. So people might use that like kind of like syllogism here. I think Richmond is actually, I think, undefeated in the conference too, which is really crazy. So it looks way too easy though to take Richmond here, given all those facts there, but it is a big sandwich spot and a letdown spot for Richmond. So I lean to the Fordham side there, but the number that we're getting is not good. I also wanted to go against UAB, but because UAB is off of beating Memphis, and now they're going to North Texas. The problem with this is that was a big win, knocking Memphis out of the ratings, out of the top 10, top 25 rankings, completely. But they're going to North Texas, and even though North Texas is the better team, and I think significantly so, North Texas just lost by only 3 to Florida Atlantic, FAU, so they're coming off a big, tough game as well. So both of those teams are in play against spots, and the fact that North Texas is laying 7.5, even though I think KenPom might have them at like 9. The fact that they're also a slow down team and they're in a spot that's not very positive for them, like a hangover spot coming off the FAU game. I don't really want to get involved laying it with North Texas, and they're not a team you want to lay like huge numbers with either, like I said, because they're one of the slowest paced teams in the country. So even though they are definitely a good team, and I do still lean to the North Texas side there, I just can't quite do that. And then I do also lean against Arkansas at Missouri. Arkansas is coming off a much tougher game than Missouri is. They just lost to Kentucky by 6. A tough game. Arkansas was close. They were in that game almost right to the end. So that's tough. And now they have to go out on the road. Missouri's laying 5.5, though, and KenPom only has this at 3. Missouri has lost, I believe, every game in the conference so far, 0-7, and they're in need of something. And they got one of the other lower teams in the conference coming into their house. So obviously a winnable game for Missouri. So I do lean to the Missouri side, but they're coming off kind of a tough game too, losing to South Carolina by 8. Missouri was not out of that game, and that was the game I was on Missouri in it. So Missouri should have put up a little bit of a better performance there, but so I can't quite get there with those, but I do lean to the Missouri side because I think Arkansas is in the worst spot. The games that I'm actually on, I'm on Xavier, one of the 2 plays. This just looks way too easy to take St. John's, man. St. John's just played a really close game against Marquette, took Marquette to the wire, lost by 1, which I believe was in Madison Square Garden, a home game. Then they played another home game. I don't know if it was also at Madison Square, if it was in St. John's home arena, which I think is a different arena. They're both kind of their home arena, though, where they beat Villanova by 20. And Villanova is not really a pushover. So St. John's looking like they're in quite a good spot here, they're looking quite good as far as the public is concerned. They just bounced back. They just got a win against Villanova. They have UConn up next as well. So this Xavier game is sandwiched in between a nice 20-point win over Villanova, although Villanova doesn't look great record-wise. And they have UConn up next, so it's a look ahead. That's on Saturday, I believe. Having to go on the road for this single road game to Xavier, and Xavier's a team that St. John's already handled at home earlier in the season by 15 points. So is St. John's really going to pay attention to Xavier when they just crushed Villanova, coming off on the heels of a game against Marquette where they took them to the wire, and they have UConn up next, and they already beat Xavier by double digits? I don't think they're going to be totally focused on Xavier, man. And the thing that clinches this, Xavier, I mean, they're below 500 in the conference now. They're at 500 on the entire season, so they're struggling mightily. Xavier is coming off losses to 2 good teams that broke their win streak. You can't fault them for losing on the road to Creighton and to UConn, but the UConn game, even though it is UConn, one of the best teams in the country, they lost that game by 43 points, man. They gave up 99 points. That's embarrassing no matter who your opponent is. If you lose by 43 points and you're just so uncompetitive, the public is going to want nothing to do with you, and you're going to want to put in a much better performance. And they only have DePaul up next, so I think they're going to be completely focused on St. John's here, coming off a total embarrassment of a performance and the fact that they already lost to St. John's once this year. I like this one a lot. Xavier in a spot to bounce back after a really embarrassing performance. And Xavier's up from 1 to 1.5. So people are going to look at this and think, how is it possible Xavier's a favorite in this game? The team with the worst record, the team had already lost the first matchup between these two teams. St. John's just crushed Villanova, whereas Xavier has looked awful. Xavier lost to Villanova when they played them, and they just got absolutely annihilated by UConn. So no one's going to want Xavier here, man. I'm laying the point with Xavier because I laid -1. So that's the first college basketball play. I like Xavier. It's a bad spot for St. John's. I think it's kind of a sandwich spot, but certainly a big look-ahead spot. It's a little bit of in-season revenge for Xavier, and Xavier is coming off a massive embarrassment, massively embarrassing loss, and the line just looks like a trap. And a lot of these trap lines, man, they kind of tend to be off from where like the power ratings guys have them, so I can't like jump in on them like kind of that Richmond one. But this one, that's not the case, man. Ken Pom, even though he does have St. John's better, he only has St. John's ranked 9 ranking points higher than Xavier. So Xavier flying under the radar here, even though the record sucks and they're without Fremantle and whatever. But I think they've been without him all season. So Ken Pom's numbers are taking that into account. Like their numbers are Xavier without him for I think the entire season. So he still has Xavier ranked 41st and St. John's ranked 32nd, and he has Xavier winning this game by 2. So I like Xavier. And then the other game that I'm going to be on is going to be taking the points with Penn State. You have Rutgers coming off back-to-back games against big teams there. Well, actually, 4 straight games against big teams, or a bunch of straight games, right? Because they won against Indiana, although, as I keep saying it, even though Indiana beat me last night, Indiana's down this year. They're just thriving on name recognition. Then Rutgers lost to Michigan State, who's way underrated, in my opinion. Michigan State, definitely a good team. Then they beat Nebraska, who's probably going to make the tournament. Nebraska, not bad at all. Then they lost to Illinois, who's one of the better teams in the conference, one of the top teams in the Big Ten. And then they came back home and they put up a fight against Purdue, man. They did not go away. Purdue had a big lead over Rutgers, and Rutgers came all the way back and got to within a couple points late in the game, man. They were within 2 or 3 points in the final, like, few minutes of the game. Rutgers, they went all out, man. I think they beat Purdue last year. I think that was one of their big wins. That was a big performance from Rutgers, man. A huge effort performance, hanging with Purdue and then just falling just short. I think they're in a flat spot after that, a hangover spot after a max effort against Purdue. They get to face Penn State now, and really Penn State towards the bottom of the conference, and power ratings wise, Penn State might actually be the worst team in the conference, ranked below 100 in the Ken Pom rankings. I think he has them lower than Michigan and lower than he certainly has them lower than Rutgers, because Rutgers is a fairly substantial favorite here. But yeah, I think he has Penn State ranked as the worst team in the entire conference. Rutgers laying 6.5 here. It's actually down from 7.5 though with Rutgers. Actually, you can get it at 7. It looks like consensus in a bunch of spots. I took 7, I believe, with Penn State. People are not going to want Penn State, even though Rutgers is only 10-9. Penn State has that ugly sub 500 record, but Rutgers, like I said, coming off that tough game against Purdue, man. And Penn State, they're going to want to do something, man. They had that huge win against Wisconsin. People will see they lost to Purdue worse than they lost to Michigan State and Purdue worse than Rutgers did. They got kind of handled by Purdue and really handled by Michigan State, losing by over 30 to Michigan State, and then losing by 17, but it was at Purdue, whereas Rutgers' game was at home. But Rutgers put in a much better performance against Purdue, so people are not really going to want anything to do with Penn State here, man. Even though they're actually half a point better than Rutgers in the conference. Penn State coming off multiple losses. They came off the Wisconsin win, a huge win for Penn State, their win of the season type of stuff. They went on the road to Ohio State and lost by double digits. I laid the points with Ohio State in that game and won, because even though it was a little bit close to the spread there, it got a little dicey, but Penn State was in a major letdown spot there. And then it seemed to carry over again into the game against Minnesota, and Penn State lost to Minnesota. Penn State had a huge lead in that game, too, and they completely blew it. Penn State, as a home favorite in that one, just totally imploded. So I think that's going to help Penn State coming into this game, too, because they should have won the game. They're expected to win that game, even though Minnesota has a better record than they do. Minnesota, not that great. Penn State, Minnesota, actually probably the second worst team in the Big Ten to Penn State, as that line kind of indicates. Penn State was only getting like mostly just home court advantage in that game. Penn State had a gigantic lead throughout the first half, totally blew it, just completely imploded, and wound up losing the game to Minnesota in a game they probably feel like they should have won. They're way ahead. They were the favorite despite the records there. So I think Penn State's in a much better bounce back spot here, whereas Rutgers, I think, is in a hangover spot after hanging with Purdue for almost the entire game. A big performance for Rutgers. Now is the time to come in and take the points with Penn State. So that's what I'm doing. And Rutgers, they're also a team that plays much better defense than offense, even though Penn State is a faster paced team than Rutgers. And I think Rutgers being at home is going to control the pace in this game, which should help Rutgers to some extent, like play their type of game. But their type of game is a slower game than what Purdue wants to play. Rutgers plays a more defensive, slower paced game, but that's going to lend itself to it being difficult for Rutgers to win by number, in my opinion, or to win by margin, in my opinion. Rutgers not totally equipped to like really cover like large numbers as a defensive team that plays a slower paced game. So I'm grabbing the points with Penn State. That's going to do it for me, man. Even though I do like that UCF play, which is kind of just on the bubble for me right now, to be taking 3 points with UCF. That's close to a play, but the plays I'm actually on one more time for the time being, at least in the NBA, San Antonio +5, the Spurs there, and in college basketball, Xavier -1 and Penn State +7. Let's get back on the winning track, man. Have a good hump day. Peace.